give it up for Brad Campbell.
All right, cool. On July 22nd, 2017, I was lying on a stretcher at Mission Hospital, and my wife Judy was by my side. For an emergency room, the mood was actually pretty lighthearted. We thought I was about to be released, and Judy had just retired from the hospital a couple of years previously. And so it was kind of like a little bit of a homecoming for her. She was visiting with the doctors and nurses and everybody who was caring for me. And then someone walked into the room and hung 2 pictures on a light box, and the room went silent. Judy had been a radiology technologist at Mission, and so she didn't need any help interpreting the scan. She looked at it, and then she bent down and whispered in my ear, "Honey, your neck is broken. Don't move." Word of advice: if you ever need to tell someone that their neck is broken, it's not necessary to add the words, "don't move." 9 years earlier, I had rediscovered a sport I'd once loved, and that was road cycling. And when I climbed on that saddle, it was like just this amazing rediscovery. I just rediscovered pain and misery and suffering and exhaustion and elation. And it was all actually good, because at a time when you're beginning to confront your own mortality, here was an activity that made me feel joyously and completely and totally alive. So I found some other mature cyclists like me who also had no business wearing spandex, and we rode and competed with one another. Just like the champions in the Tour de France, we really loved and admired these guys and the way they competed, and they conquered mountains. They were just the total badass athletes. And they had this amazing ability, even if they would have the worst kind of crash, they would pop back up and jump back on their bike and continue the ride. And it was always so impressive to us. Well, on July 22nd, I was on a ride with some friends in Transylvania County. I was coming around a bend at a high speed with 5 cyclists behind me, came around the bend, and there in the middle of the road was a ribbon of sand and gravel that had been washed there by the previous night's rain. I didn't even have time to react to it. I had one thought, and that was relax. And they say at moments like this that time slows down. But in my case, it actually sped up. I hit the gravel, and I felt my rear wheel just imperceptibly almost move. And I thought, I'm through it. And then the very next sensation was my helmeted head bouncing off the pavement like an overinflated basketball. I was so stunned by the impact that I didn't even feel the rider behind me riding over my back as I slid across the road and landed face down in a ditch. Well, my first instinct was to jump back on my bike and be a badass like the Tour de France rider. So a couple of buddies rolled me over, and they proceeded to give me kind of the concussion protocol, which was they asked me what year it was and what my name was. I answered both those questions successfully. They were about to let me up when a rider came running over. His name was George Stevens, a friend of mine. He said, "Brad, are you hurting anywhere?" And I thought for a second, and I said, "You know, now that you mention it, George, my neck feels a little stiff." He said, "You're not going anywhere." And he basically took over at that point. He had someone call 911. He made me comfortable there on the side of the road. And as he's doing all this, I'm starting to feel more and more comfortable. And my head is clearing, and I'm starting to feel pretty good. And I say, "George, really, I want to get up." Other riders were beginning to advocate for me. "Hey, George, he wants to get up. Let him get up." And 2 riders reached out and were going to help me up. And George laid his body on top of mine. And I said, "George, why won't you let me get up?" And he said, "Because I love you." Well, the ambulance came, they put a collar on me, they put me on the stretcher, they put me in the ambulance, and someone handed me my phone. It had fallen out of my pocket in the crash. And so I called Judy, and typically what I do is I text her after I get off the road. But she knew this call was coming far earlier than she had expected. So she answered the phone with, "What happened?" And I said, "Don't worry, baby, everything's okay. They're loading me in the ambulance now." word of advice, if you ever are in a similar situation and you want to reassure them, just take my advice. Do not use the words, "Don't worry, baby, everything's okay. They're loading me in the ambulance now." So at the hospital, the neurosurgeon on call was Dr. John Silver. And you've heard the jokes about neurosurgeons. What's the difference between God and a neurosurgeon? Well, God doesn't think he's a neurosurgeon. But he was not this kind of person. He was this kind, wonderful, warm-hearted, patient man. And one of the first things he told me, he says, is you're going to make a 100% recovery. And at that moment, all fear left me. So the surgery took 6 hours. When they couldn't fix me by going in through the front of my neck, they flipped me over like an underdone steak and made a long incision in the back of my neck and built a scaffolding out of titanium and screws and C3 and C4 and then sewed me up. I spent 4 days at Mission Hospital, and it was like being cared for by relatives that I didn't know or had never met. It was just an amazing experience. And then I was released to Judy, and Judy took care of me through that entire recovery. Well, on July 22nd, 2018, I was in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. I was 2/3 the way through a cross-country bike ride that I'd begun on June 7th. I rode from Astoria, Oregon to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, 3,691 miles. But best of all, I was actually able to raise $15,000 for the Shepherd Center in Atlanta, Georgia. And I hope you guys know about the Shepherd Center. I'll be happy to tell you about it. But they do amazing work for people who've had traumatic brain and spine injuries, much worse than my own. So I was very proud of that. And Judy, she was there with me when I dipped my rear wheel in the water in the Atlantic. So every day I wake up and I see this scar, and I've taken to calling it my scar of gratitude. I'm not just grateful for all of the people, the professionals at Mission who helped me, for Dr. Silver and for Judy and for George Stevens, and all my cycling friends, but I'm actually, and this may sound funny, but I'm actually grateful that I broke my neck. It's as if written here instead of the scar is in permanent ink are the words, "Seize the day." It's a powerful, it's a daily reminder. It's a daily reminder of a very powerful lesson. And it's what got me back on the bike. It's what carried me across the country. And it's what got me here standing on the stage despite my fear tonight. Thank you.